Hello and welcome to the Beyond the Label podcast. My name is Molly Tempesta and I am a current senior at Assumption University, majoring in political science and communications and media. It is an honor to be the host of this podcast, and I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to tune in. Now, go grab a blanket, curl up on the couch, cue up the podcast from your car, or go for a nice walk while listening. Whichever your personal preference is, welcome to Beyond the Label. Back again with the Beyond the Label podcast, brought to you by yours truly, Molly Tempesta. Thank you for tuning in to the third and final episode of the Beyond the Label podcast, known as The Weight of Words. I know many of you are probably wondering, what does Beyond the Label mean? What could this podcast possibly be about? And you maybe even question what the purpose of it is, and is it honestly worth your time? There is validity to your curiosity, which is why I'm going to tell you, yes, listening to this podcast is 100% worth of your time. And I'm going to tell you that by telling you all of my hopes and dreams for this podcast series. My hope for this podcast is that it will hopefully encourage listeners to lend a listening ear while opening their hearts and minds to radical acceptance. The purpose of this podcast is to influence those who listen to quite literally look beyond the label. Clever, huh? All right, well, all jokes aside, we will now begin the third and final episode of this podcast series known as the Beyond the Label podcast. This final episode is called The Weight of Words, and in today's episode, I will be sharing personal stories and experiences of individuals who are living with chronic illness, disease, disability, and who have experienced immense loss and suffering. These stories are from very resilient and strong people who are really going to show the impact of the weight in words and how words really have the capability to either uplift and influence people to focus on the positive and persevere despite their struggle, or words have the potential to just completely tear people down. The words we say do matter, and they hold weight and immense impact. So I thank you for tuning in today, and I cannot wait for you to hear all about the weight of words. In today's episode, we will be discussing the power and the weight of words. It is very difficult to live in society today where everything seems to be publicized and put out for the world of media. It feels that because of this, many people have struggled and have become very desensitized. Instead of having conversation, airing out feelings, and allowing ourselves the gift of self-expression, we instead project our problems and insecurities onto other people. There have been many instances where there's been a rise and a significant increase of cyberbullying, and it's become a very different and difficult thing for our world to battle and struggle with, as social media hasn't always existed. I'm going to now play one of my favorite TED Talks called The Underestimated Power of Words. This TED Talk is presented by a young man named Samuel Martin, who at the time that this podcast was being recorded and produced was a 16-year-old student presenting at the Ann Arbor conference. And this podcast is very powerful as he provides the wisdom needed to support how much words really do matter. So I'm going to play that for you right now.
Now, before I start, can I ask the audience to clap their hands 5 times for me? Then 3 times. Then 5 times again. It's amazing to consider how much power is in the spoken word. then add position to those words, whether it be physical or situational, and people are compelled to do what they're told. There are over 1 million words in the English language, and that number keeps expanding. Words have the power, and that number keeps expanding. Words can be used to compel, amuse, instruct, heal, or harm. Throughout our lives, we've been taught the basic art of language. It distinguishes us as civilized, intelligent. Throughout our lives, we've been taught the basic art of language. Words can be used to compel, amuse, instruct, heal, or harm. That's not bad. My bad about that. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But each word has purpose, and each phrase has meaning, a message to convey. Our words can be used as beautiful decorations to incite destruction or cultivate peace. So why have we underestimated this power that God has given us? By what reasoning do we believe that words only live on paper or in our thoughts, but fail to comprehend the transitioning to the material world? Because our words have power. Our words have the power to manifest the brightest benevolent actions or the deepest, darkest fears. So what are your words filled with? Hate, love, bitterness, blessing, victory, or defeat? Who are you? What do you value? How do you convey what you believe? Our actions emanate from our thoughts. Our thoughts are a reflection of what we want to achieve. We attempt to say with our mouths that virtue is the intent of our words, but the impact of those words betray the truth of the heart. Because our words have power. In this day and time, it's critical for us to be careful of our words. Gone is the time of internal prejudice, veiled as jokes and shared between close friends and family is tolerable. Recordings, posts, tweets has caused the world to be drunken with hurtful, harmful words. Talking but not communicating. Words for the sake of words. There is no reverence for the power that lies within the tongue. We want to share every fit of rage, every nonsensical thought because we can. But just because you have the ability to speak and a platform of listeners does not mean you should, because our words have power. Wise men speak because they have something to say, but fools because they have to say something. It is when we censor ourselves that our speech is truly free. Free from negative connotations, free to liberate us and those that have a benefit of experiencing careful word selection, thoughtful phrasing. That encourages us all to do better, to be better. Ignorance is too bold for arrogant heart to withhold. But humble empathy reflects love and respect that we can all see, regardless of the race, class, or creed. So as I look around at all of us, it's funny to believe that we have ammo in our mouth. Our words locked and loaded in the chamber of our lips. People firing off rounds with their steady quips, wanting to prove a point when really none really exists. So our fight ends when we pick up our books and thoughtfully raise our pens. When we declare our voice and know that people will comprehend. Talk to strangers as if they were our friends, knowing when to be silent, so no violence ever begins. Thank you very much.
This is truly one of my favorite TED Talks to ever be produced. And I really enjoy it because someone so young was able to grasp a concept that most of the world and the human population still very much struggles with. And I don't mean to be too controversial or political, but I must say, Samuel Martin seems to possess the wisdom and ability to connect with the human race that many of our leaders and politicians lack. Words really do matter, and the weight of them is truly what matters most. It is very important for us to really think and reflect before we speak. An insult or an uneducated comment that seems insignificant to us could linger in the minds of those affected for a lifetime. The same line, the same words, ruminating over their thoughts and headspace for years to come. And although sticks and stones break bones, words really do leave a mark. Scars heal, but the spoken and written word lasts forever. I truly feel that it is important to read about people's personal experiences when discussing the weight of words. I feel that literature, whether it's, a physical written story or a poem or, a clip, anything like that, I just feel is so important when discussing the weight of words, because words are truly important and we're discussing the immense weight of them. So this is a poem that is written by a woman named Audre Lorde, who touches upon her experience with her battle with breast cancer, and it is called A Litany for Survival. So I'm going to read you her poem. It is truly a beautiful poem, and it's devastating, and her words do carry a lot of weight. So I'm going to read that for you now. So she says, "For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at least once before and after. Seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who are imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, the illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us, for all of us. This instant, in this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we might never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid our love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, not welcomed, but when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." This poem, A Litany for Survival, again written by Audre Lorde, I just think is such a beautiful testament to life. Unfortunately, there are going to be instances where in our lives we are going to be thrown into the truth of diagnosis with disease and illness and horrible and horrific diseases like cancer. And I just think, although tragic and really sad, her words are just a beautiful depiction of what it could be like for someone. And although her words are raw and honest and really sad, they're also at the same time almost empowering. Like at the end of her paragraph, at the end of her stanza, at the end of the poem, where she says, "For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive." And it just talks about the fear. We're not fearful only one time when we may get cancer. We're fearful our whole life. So she said it's better to speak remembering and cherishing the memories than really trying to pretend that we as humans are meant to survive. Unfortunately, she is basically saying that we all have an expiration date, and in order to survive, this is literally a litany to survive. Here is how I'm feeling. And I think it is a remarkable poem. I think it's raw. I think it's real. I think it's vulnerable. I think it's honest. And I think this poem and her words hold a lot of weight. And this is one of those instances where we have seen again, as I mentioned, on social media or in other instances in life where people make insensitive comments, and when they perpetuate stigma and when they say inappropriate things, yes, their weight of words are unfortunately weighed in a negative light and they're not being used for good. But there is also this capacity and power within our words where they really do have the capability to make a difference and to propel someone to persevere and to never give up and to see the light at the end of that dark tunnel, and to just look at things in a different way. And I just think that that's really beautiful. And I think that poetry and books and literature really can do that for us. And I just think, like I said, sticks and stones, they may break bones, but words, the written word, really does last forever. And I think it's a really impactful thing to recognize. Now, there are so many, chronic conditions, diseases, cancer, autoimmune, diseases that get so stigmatized, and it's really unfair. And unfortunately, people refuse to look beyond the label, and sometimes the label, again, just provides this false reality and preconceived notion for many individuals, unfortunately. And a really big population and group of people who are neurodivergent, seem to also become very stigmatized and judged. And there's a very big lack of understanding of how neurodivergent people are born, how they operate. And there is a very impactful clip from a film from the Golden Hat Foundation called A Mother's Courage. And it's a very short clip, but it basically talks about her experience with her son's autism and her kind of search for answers, pursuit of the truth, and her kind of attempt to figure out and narrow down an understanding of autism so that she can relay this message and advocate for other autistic individuals and kind of just continue this message. So I'm going to play this clip for you right now. It is immensely impactful, and the words knowledge and education provided throughout this clip really do hold weight, and it's very impactful.
Hey, Taylor. How are you?
I'm fine.
Are you happy?
Happy and sad.
I don't think you're sad. You're happy.
I'm happy.
What did you get out? Mitch, come here, Mitch.
We were having breakfast one morning, and suddenly he looked at me, dropped his spoon to the floor, and started screaming, "My mouth won't say the words, my mouth won't say the words, my daddy, my mouth won't say the words."
The three main features of autism. First, there's a social impairment. Second, there's a communication impairment. And third thing about autism is stereotypes and repetitive behaviors.
Maybe your son, can learn auditory things as long as he's calm. I often get asked if I can snap my fingers when I want to not be autistic. I'm content to be pure geek, techie. I've often wondered, what would a totally normal brain be like? It might be really boring.
Það allir búin að segja það við mig, hann skilur þetta ekki. Og ég meina, og það horft á mann eins og, ég meina, ok, ég veit þú vilt barninu fyrir best, en vertu bara raunhæf, skilur. Hann með þroska og 2 ára gamalt barn, ekki vera að gera rof á hafa vænt.
So I'm going to just translate from what that clip just said, but I'm going to lower the volume and translate it as we go on throughout this episode. But it basically is the doctor saying to this woman whose son has autism, don't get your hopes up. Your child is going to live a very, very difficult life. And unfortunately, when people are diagnosed with cancer or autism, or whether you're divergent or whatever this condition is people always jump to conclusions and say, I'm sorry, like it's some negative thing. And this woman, previously in the clip, she said, sometimes I wonder, would a normal brain be boring? And we don't need to be apologizing for someone being diagnosed with a neurotypical condition. It's honestly a beautiful thing. It celebrates our differences. It makes the world go round. When members of society have a different outlook and a different way of operating, it just brings strengths to the table that neurotypical people probably don't have. So I am going to translate the rest of this. So this is the doctor saying, don't get your hopes up.
There are days where I say, I just want to take these kids and go somewhere and hide and crawl in a hole. But you can't. You can't do that because these kids need to be in the world. They need other kids around and other people around them because that's going to...
Now this other woman is saying, there are hard days. Sometimes as a mother of a child who has autism, I just want to go dig myself into a hole, but you can't. These children are just as deserving of a typical childhood than any other child, no matter if you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. And she's saying the world needs these children, which I could not agree more with. I mean, we all have our stories. We all have our own things, whether it's intellectual, whether you have, an intellectual disability, or whether it's a physical condition or a disability or a chronic illness or a terminal illness, whatever it is, everyone's perspective, everyone's words, everyone's stories really do make an impact, and they have a lot to bring to the table.
Now.
So this is now talking about unlocking an autistic mind. So a quote from Albert Einstein has been inserted into the clip, and it says, "Few see with their own eyes and feel with their own hearts." Again, the weight of words.
Give me one hand. You can play with beads with one hand. Give me one.
Alrighty, so that was that clip, which is just another really impactful example of having the weight of words, especially in the healthcare industry. There are many times where doctors just don't have the bedside manner to just deliver information properly. And this is now going to lead into this next advice section of the column of what not to say to an individual who's experienced said things. So I have come up with things not to say to people with terminal illness, those who have experienced immense suffering and loss, those who have been diagnosed with Down syndrome, and those who have been diagnosed with autism. So I will begin, and so how I got these quotes and things not to say are commonly things said to individuals. I know people who have loved ones with both autism and Down syndrome. I know someone who has experienced the loss of a miscarriage, and I do know plenty of people who have had cancer. And to protect their privacy, I will not be saying their name. So I'm going to begin with commonly said things to people with autism. Typically, people can say, "Don't worry, aren't we all a little autistic? You seem so normal. Are you sure you have autism? You don't look like you have autism. Wow, you're so energetic for an autistic person." So these are some quotes that someone sent me, things that have been sent to them as they live with autism, and just, it's so insensitive, it's wrong, and these things have been said to this individual in their childhood, and they are now 24 years old, and it sticks with them to this day. So it really just shows the impact and the weight of words and how long it can stay with you. These are other commonly said things to people with Down syndrome. Someone said, God puts these types of children on the earth for a reason. Wow, you are just so special. I could never deal with someone like this. This was said to someone who this was said to a parent of a child with Down syndrome. And then people just say, I am sorry, which again, just continues that insensitive nature, and just, it's just tragic. I know many individuals who have been diagnosed with or are currently dealing with cancer. So they have provided me 10 things not to say to a cancer patient. The first one is, you need to be strong to survive. At least you will get skinny. I heard the treatment is really tough. Were you a heavy smoker? Did you drink heavily? Is it terminal, or will you live? Be grateful for the good survival rate for that type of cancer. I was up all night worrying about you. I've lost so much sleep. Is that kind of cancer contagious? Will you lose your hair? My gosh, we could go shopping for wigs. Again, completely insensitive. Who would ever say this to someone? But they have been said, which is why this podcast is being done. The next is 10 things not to say to a woman who has miscarried. The first being, it's for the best. What do you think you did to make this happen? Were you taking your vitamins? It's a good thing you weren't that far along. Everything happens for a reason. 25% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. Are you sure you took folic acid? I'm sure you'll be able to get pregnant again someday. Do you think you could have done something differently? And I'm sure it's just not good timing. The weight of words have such a drastic impact, especially when someone is struggling or suffering, whether it's struggling with their condition or grieving immense loss. Words really do have the power to just help or harm. And this podcast today has shown examples of all of that. And I hope you have learned something. And I cannot thank you enough for listening to this podcast series. And I just hope from what you take from it is to never judge, always listen, and always be open. Thank you. And please continue to always look beyond the label.